Hey folks, I am Pruitt and I am going to walk you through a particular edit that I did with some drone photography. Hey folks, hope y'all are doing all right. I'm unbelievable as always. I'm Pruitt, and what I'm wanting to do today is take a look at a photograph that I shot with my Audible Robotics X-Star Premium drone, and I shared it over on Instagram. Be sure you're following me over there. Well, I put a poll up to ask if anybody wanted to know how I created that shot, and nobody said no. Everybody said yes. That was a shocker to me. Apparently everybody liked that photograph and wanted to know how I did it. So that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to walk you through my process in creating this shot. I use both Lightroom and Photoshop to get the look that I wanted to get with this particular photograph. A couple things to keep in mind when you're doing drone photography. You really have to take into account the wind variable, because as that drone is floating in the sky, it can shake just a little bit. So if you have a slow shutter, you're probably going to get some blurry images. For me, my best practice is, number one, is to make sure I'm shooting in RAW format. And also, whenever I do a shot, I'm snapping a bunch of different shots. Well, not shots. I'm snapping that same scene a bunch of different times. Not necessarily burst mode, but that's not a bad idea. But I do at least 3 or 4, right after each other, because it's part of my workflow, and you'll see why here in a second. So without further ado, let's take a look, and we'll go inside of Lightroom first. So let me show you my screen. Okay, so you see my screen here in Lightroom, and the photograph that I want to look at is this one here. And I took it 3 times, as you could see. So I have 3 different snaps of that particular scene. And this is just a shot of my neighborhood here. Nothing to it. I just thought it was pretty outside because we're getting signs of spring that morning. Got a little bit of fog in the background, but again, this is a raw image. You notice it's a DNG format, and it could use a little bit of work. It could use a little bit of sharpening and a little bit of color adjustment, and that's why I got it in Lightroom. So typically my flow is I grab my first one that I want to work on, and I'll do some general touch up on it. The thing that I like about Lightroom is it allows you to use camera profiles. If I got a Canon and then I got a 35mm f2 lens, I can set that profile for this image. But of course, this was not shot with a regular DSLR or something. It was shot with a drone. Fortunately, you have a few profiles in here from the folks at DJI. My Audible drone is not in here, but the camera profile for the Audible drone is very similar to the Phantom 3 line. So I always go in here and I select the Phantom 3 profile before I do anything. First step, I do dehaze. And this goes for almost every photograph that I shoot, whether it's drone, smartphone, DSLR. I do my dehaze as the very first step before I get into working with exposure and whatnot. Next, I'll check the exposure, noticing the movement of my histogram to make sure it's properly exposed and not overexposed or underexposed. Contrast. My highlights are a little high in my opinion, so I'm going to bring that down just a touch, because I don't want it to feel like the whites on these dogwood trees are blinding you. So I bring that down just a little bit. And I like to decrease the black levels because I use that as part of my contrast. I like to use the black levels to separate the different colors a little more. Now, granted, I'll lose detail right here in the trees if I take that black level too far, like that. So I don't want to move it down too much. This is when they talk about having dynamic range. You'll be able to see details in the darker parts of the image as well as the bright part of the image. So right here, this being a shadow, I still wanted to show a little bit of tree detail. So I'll take it to right about there. And then I'll increase the shadow a little bit more. So there. Now you have detail in the trees here. Pretty decent balance when it comes to color. Now clarity, to try to sharpen it up just a little bit, increase the vibrance some. I don't like to increase the vibrance and saturation too often because sometimes people will overdo it and it looks just way too phony. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have an artistic reason for doing that, have at it. I don't do that for most of my images. Every now and then I'll boost the saturation, but it depends on the mood and the particular scene, as well as, you know, the message that I'm trying to present with that image. So I'm not going to take it up too much. All right, so we got that square. Now I'm looking at the sky back here. I could get a little more detail out of the sky. And a lot of times I can adjust that with the luminance setting and moving the blue and aqua. All right. But if you notice, when I did that, I got a little bit of fringing and artifacts here in the sky. See, if you zoom in, see all of that grain right there? I don't want that. So that meant I pushed it a little too far. And so we'll push it back a little bit. So there's still some there, but it's not as bad. And there's definitely some down here in the mountain range, but that's fixable. You can also adjust the actual saturation here. So I'm going to increase the blue like that and maybe decrease the aqua. And the aqua didn't touch it too much. Take a look at it. Yeah, still a little bit of grain there. All right, so that's doable for me. Next, I'll look at the sharpening, bump it up just a touch, because I'm not going to try to depend on Lightroom to do all of my optimal sharpening for this image. That's going to happen in the next step in Photoshop, but I want to give Photoshop a little bit of room to work, so I'll touch it up just a little bit inside of Lightroom. All right, so a little bit of sharpening, and we'll do some noise reduction. So hopefully we lost that grain back there in the mountain range. Yeah, you can see it moved it out now. So this is without the noise reduction. See the grain right there and a little bit right there. When you push that up, it starts to go away. It's not perfect, but it looks a lot better. And this is fine, you know, because you're not going to be zoomed in that much on these images anyway. This is way off in the background. Now, the thing to remember when you're doing noise reduction, the more you increase the noise reduction in your image, it sort of screws around with the sharpness of the image. It makes things a little smooth, and sometimes it makes it too smooth. So you start to lose edge detail inside your image. So just be sure that you have a happy medium between the sharpness value as well as the noise reduction value. I'm going to do a little bit of rotation just to make sure. Yeah. Rotate it like that. That's a little bit better because the horizon line was tilted just a little bit. That normally doesn't happen with the drone because it has a stabilizing gimbal on it. Not sure what happened this time. That is the preliminary view. And again, since I shot this 3 times, what I'm going to do is put all of the editing that I've done to this image onto these other 2 images here. So I'll click on the bottom and select all 3 of them. And then I'll just say sync. And that's going to basically go through everything that I did and synchronize it to all 3 images. So they're all the same when it comes to color and saturation and even the cropping. All right. So now when I click on it, you see they pretty much look the same, other than the little bit of movement, because again, it's a drone. It can't necessarily stay perfectly still. Now let's move on to the next step and go into Photoshop. So I'll select all three of these images. I'll right click, then I'll select Edit In, Open as Layers in Photoshop. And Photoshop's going to open up here in a second and do its thing. All right, and it's going to bring those three images in as individual layers over here in the layer panel on the right hand side of Photoshop. All right, so we know all of these images are not perfectly aligned with each other. That's one thing that we're going to have to consider in this part of the process. But before I even do that, I like to highlight all three of these images, go to image size, and then I like to bump up the quality to about 175%. Okay. You can go as high as 200% if you want. I mean, you're really blowing this image up, and you notice the dimensions are, 7,000 pixels plus by 4,000 pixels. That's huge, huge image. And make sure you have this box checked inside of Photoshop, and it says nearest neighbor hard edge. This way you don't lose the details that you have, and it doesn't look too weird when it's blown up. But I like to go to about 175%, not too big, not too small. And again, it's going to give me a little more headroom to go in and make any type of detail editing and keeping the quality. So now it's zoomed in really, really close because I made it big. So let's zoom out. All right, so now that everything is all the same size, I need to align these images. So I right click all of them, and I'll go to the edit menu, auto align the layers. Select auto here, click OK. Photoshop's going to think. So now the images are aligned, but you notice these little transparency edges. That's because everything wasn't perfectly lined up to begin with. The easy way to fix that is to just crop out these transparent edges. But you also need to be careful of little spots like this here. Notice that there's almost like a hard edge in the sky right there. And again, that comes from the shifting. So we'll do the crop tool. And you can crop it as little or as much as you like. Confirm button. And our image is now lined up and cropped perfectly. Okay, so let's have some fun here. Let's get real nerdy and convert all of these to smart objects. And depending on how big your images are, it might take a little while to convert those three images to smart objects. And it also depends on the kind of computer that you're working with. If you got pretty decent hardware, it shouldn't take it too terribly long. All right, so I created a smart object. Now, if I want, I can go into the layers menu, smart objects, stack mode, and select mean. If you watch my previous videos, you notice this is the same technique to create a simulated long exposure. I like to just double check this just to make sure I get decent clarity. Sometimes it works pretty well. Sometimes it doesn't. Well, actually, most of the time it doesn't, but I do just like to double check just to make sure. And after this ran, doesn't look like, yeah, it's still a little soft. So I'm just going to undo that. And I will continue on with using a high pass filter. So I'll make a copy twice. And then I also like to group those two layers together. All right. So this layer will be my Gaussian blur filter, because this is how you do a frequency separation when it comes to sharpening your image. Set that Gaussian blur to where everything is just out of focus like that. And then on this layer, we'll select a high pass filter, which is going to make this thing really, really sharp and clear. When you have it all the way down like that, your screen is totally gray. But as you slide this radius here, you start to see some of your detail come back. You click OK there. Now, granted, you're like, what the heck is wrong with this image? That's because the blending mode is wrong. Change that to linear light, and you got your image back. Something still doesn't quite look right to me with this one, so I like to play with this radius. If you make it too sharp, it's going to look really bad like that. So let's find the happy medium. So that's good. Now, if you want to double check it and see how it looks, you put those layers in a group. You just turn that group off and back on, and you can see the difference in the sharpness and clarity of it. See how fuzzy this truck looks and how the trees look. Now that I turn it on, that truck looks a lot better, and these trees have a lot more detail in them. Okay. High pass filter is a pretty slick tool. Photoshop, I'm pretty much done in here. So I'll just hit File, Save. It's going to save this really, really, really big image. It's going to take it a little while. There it goes. I thought, there it goes. And then I'll just hit Close. And this is going to take me back into Lightroom for a final rundown. So now that I'm in Lightroom, I can do basically the finishing touches that I had on this image. For the most part, my color is the way that I wanted it. But I want to play with some of the fine details just a little more, such as, you know, how the streets look here and how the sky looks and the background looks, because I still see a little bit of noise back there. So we're going to get to the nitty gritty and pull out our adjustment brush. And we're going to start with the noise brush. And I'm just going to crank this way up like that. Okay. And then I'm going to brush the sky to get rid of any noise that's back here in the sky and on the mountain range, like so. All right, so now let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, it's still some there, but that's zoomed in really, really tight. So you're going to see some artifacts. But that looks much better than what it did earlier. And again, remember, if you're doing noise reduction, it goes hand in hand with your sharpness. Since it's just the sky, I'm going to reduce the sharpness because I don't need the sky to be super sharp. The sky can be soft. So we'll reduce it. All right, so that's done. And now I'll do another brush. And I want to play with some of the details of the street here. So let's go with a darken, also known as burning, for the world of dodge and burning. So I'll put a point there. And what it's going to do is decrease the exposure wherever I paint. And if you don't have one, I highly recommend getting yourself a Wacom pen tablet. You can get them for under $100, and it allows you to use a stylus while you're doing this edit. So the painting that I'm getting ready to do is a lot easier with one of these versus trying to use a mouse. So I'm going to paint the streets here. Just make it a little bit darker. Okay, I don't think that's dark enough, so I'm going to decrease it a little more. Not too dark. I think that's okay. And if you paint too much, see how I'm getting some of the sidewalk? Sometimes that's okay, sometimes it's not. The trick is zooming in to where you can get a little better control. changing your brush size as well. Got a little more control. Huh, that's me right there. And yes, I'm brushing all the way up the street. And inside of Lightroom, you know, I'm zoomed in on this by pressing Control plus on my keyboard or Control minus to zoom out. And when I want to slide the image, I hold down the space bar and just drag to move the image around. And then I let go of the space bar so I can get back to brushing. But like I said a minute ago, sometimes you'll go over your target when it comes to brushing. You can easily erase by holding your Alt key or Option. I think it's Option on Mac. I don't know. I'm on Windows. And just erase where you overbrushed. And if you can't tell where you overbrushed, you can click this little button right here to show the mask, or hit O on your keyboard. And it brings up this red mask that shows you everywhere that you've painted. So I'm going to take my eraser and erase all of the red that was over here. Okay, and now we'll paint the other road like so. I overdid it, so I need to erase. Okay, now see, that street looks a lot better that way, in my opinion. And let's smooth it out with some noise reduction too. There we go. That looks better. Okay, so we can turn that off. And we're going to play with the angle and perspective of this shot. So you go into the transform menu here, and I like to roll it just a bit more like that. Okay. So I think it gives it a little more depth. And then you can adjust the aspect too. Now notice when you change these different options here, you're going to lose some of your pixel size here, some of your image size. And that's okay. That comes with the territory. And now that I have it that way, I need to crop out those dead areas. So we'll move in just a bit. Okay. I think that works. Cool. Looks good. And lastly, I'll just check my dehaze. Again, I didn't think the dehaze was needed. Yeah, really didn't need it that much, so I'll just leave it about 15. Lastly, I'll take a look at the camera calibration. I like playing around with the orange and blue channels just to see what kind of look I can get. As I adjust the orange and blue, you'll notice the detail of the clay that's on the ground comes out a little more. That fence came out a little bit more. The dead leaves on this tree came out just a touch more. And again, just use your own judgment. And the blue, you know, depending on the direction you push it, can make it really, really weird or make it really, really cool in the view as well as the actual temperature of it. Boom. Okay, I think that works. So there you have it. That's just my workflow for looking at my drone shots. I also recommend this with smartphone photography because, again, you're dealing with smaller sensors, so you're not going to get all of the details that you think you're getting. But using that stack mode the way that I did, and you know, be sure to try to snap a couple different exposures at a time, whether it's burst mode or just tap, tap, tap the way that I did, that it allows you to get yourself a little more leeway so you can be a little more generous in your editing process and be able to preserve some more details. Sorry, I can't speak very well today. But again, thank you folks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video, click that like button. I really appreciate that. And be sure to hit the subscribe and the share button so other people that are curious about photography will be able to see this content. Thank you all very, very much. Be sure to check out all the links below in the bottom of this video, as that's just another way to help support me and my channel, which includes getting 2 free audiobooks from the folks at Audible. If you sign up through my link, that's antpruitt.com/audible, to get yourself 2 free audiobooks and a 30-day free trial. Whether you want to keep those the free trial or not, you still get to keep the 2 free audiobooks. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace out.